our local historians. We're gonna, at some time or another, you all are gonna be speakers because you're gonna have history of your own, and all you have to do is call Jennifer here, our librarian, and say, hey, I want to be part of the program. So we welcome you. I'm Diane, I'm the MC, and I'm really excited, just as you are, to hear about former Mayor Ramsey. I've heard so much about him. I didn't move here till '84, and so I did not know him. But having talked with Jasper, who's going to do this program, I want you to know that, first of all, a little bit about Jasper. He does not want to talk about himself, but what I do know is that for years he took over the hospitality business, which is, of course, the business his dad and mom were both in. And he was born in Conway, and when I guess he was just a few days old, moved to Myrtle Beach. And, of course, has been here ever since. One of his school teachers is here today, so she told him it's his day to teach us. And I think that's pretty cool. So Jasper is going to talk to us about his dad, but what I want to tell you is something very poignant. I like to call all of the speakers before we come over here, and so I called Jasper 2 days ago and said, well, Jasper, how's it going? And he could barely talk about it. He's very choked up, having researched all of his father's achievements. He says this has been very cathartic. We all know how wonderful our own parents were, but when you start doing research into the newspaper clippings and film and all the things that Jennifer was able to help Jasper with, he too was amazed at the incredible achievements of his dad. So let me present to you Jasper Ramsey, and he is the son of former Mayor Ramsey.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, I thank folks all very much for coming. I appreciate it tremendously. One thing I want to jump into real quickly to clarify before we get into it, because you're going to start seeing dates and things like that, and I'm not particularly well preserved. So what I'm getting at is, my dad was 60 when I was born in 1959, and I'm no kid myself, 64. So that if you're kind of wondering about the math, that's how all that works out. But just to go ahead and jump right in, photograph of him right here. My dad, Mayor J.N. Ramsey Sr., known to all his friends as Jap, he was the leader of the incorporation drive, the successful incorporation drive for the town of Myrtle Beach back in 1938. So he was there at the beginning. He was in here even before that. We'll talk a little bit about what that involved. He did serve as mayor for 2 terms in the late 40s and early 50s, working extremely hard to bring the Air Force Base back. I'm assuming we have a lot of visitors here who may not know, but we had an Army Air Corps base here during World War II, which left, bringing that back in industrial development, and then involved in a number of other ways that I'll have the opportunity to kind of touch on a little bit today. Also, he, out of frustration, because he couldn't get the city to move, donated the money for the purchase of the land for the convention center, Myrtle Beach Convention Center. It's been expanded dramatically there. And also, this will interest Mrs. Taylor, too, for those of you who are local. And I found this out because I was like 6 years old when this was going on. But it also included the land where Pepper Gatings Recreation Center is, the old middle school, which is now the Adult Education Center, Duckshaw Stadium, and all that, too. So all of that. So he was a very involved a gentleman. He loved Myrtle Beach very, very much. He really kind of saw it as the promised land. I'm going to tell you a little bit about his early life and kind of explain to you how he got here. And anyway, maybe you'll kind of understand why it meant so much to him. Am I doing okay holding this in the right place?
You're doing great.
Glad to hear it. Before I get started, one thing. This is Mark Crua, the City Information Director, who's a huge part of all this. And, of course, Jim Nasser, the librarian, a huge part of it, too. Martina Corley, and, of course, our wonderful MC, Diane Devon Stokes. But we were harassing Mark a little bit because this is obviously a colorized picture of my dad. He had red hair, not this brownish hair. And I was just telling Mark that's something they need to work on getting fixed. This is a portrait over at City Hall of him in the lineup with all the other mayors. So anyway, what I'm getting at is I want to get you to feel what he really looked like to get started. Basically, you got my dimples, and then my daughter Mary Colleen, stand up dear, and this is his red hair. So, red hair there. Come up and hang out with us. Help correct me if I mess up or anything, or tell me, Dale, wrap it up. Anyway, this is his granddaughter, Myrtle Ramsey. Unfortunately, never got the opportunity to meet her. She passed away 23 years before she was born, but she's really a chip off the old block, that's for sure. And he's extremely, extremely proud of her. So I've told questions. I've been told absolutely questions come at the end of the conversation if you're still awake. I always, and Mary Colleen knows this, I always follow the rules. But I just got to bend it a little bit, one, because that's the way I am. But I know folks, different backgrounds here. Would you mind, if you would, raising your hand if you, and again, love the snowbirds, hope we got a ton of them, hope to get to chat with you afterwards. But any folks who consider themselves locals here, do you mind raising your hand? Oh, we got a nice group. Wonderful. Now, keep your hands up, please. If you raise your hand up, Jack, get your hand up. You're a local. You're the ultimate local. Now, again, my dad passed away in '73. My mom died in 2014, but she had been out of the public eye for a while. Did any of you know my dad or my mom or anything like that? Obviously, Jack did. Mrs. Taylor did. If you were there, well, thank you so much. Just kind of get an idea of what the audience is. I mentioned, as I said, I'm not much of a public speaker, so I may put you to sleep. The good news is my dad had a really, really colorful life, so I've got good material to work with. So I hope you'll find it entertaining. So I'm figuring out how I'm going to balance the remote and my notes, but I'm going to do my best. So thank you for bearing with me here. Old man put on his glasses.
Maybe I can do the remote.
Thank you so much, Mark. Oh, you big. Yeah. So my dad was born in 1899, September 4th, 1899, in a place called Madison County, North Carolina. It's literally the end of the world. I don't know if any of you all have ever been there. It's between Asheville and Johnson City. Interstate 26 runs through there now. I haven't been in a long, long time, so it's probably developed some, although it's hard because it's literally all vertical. My dad used to tell me when I was a kid, and I believed because I believed anything he would say, that the cows had longer legs on the right side than the left side, so they wouldn't tumble off the mountain. In any case, but literally it was the middle of nowhere. It was certainly the middle of nowhere back in 1899 when he was born. He wound up in Myrtle Beach, and we're going to tell you how he did. And he served as a two-term mayor from November 5th, 1949 to November 13th, 1951, and then he was the seventh mayor, I believe I'm right, but he was the first, I know I'm right, he was the first one to be reelected, and served a second term from November 13th, 1951 to January 5th, 1954. They were actually like 2.5-year terms back then, which from his opinion was plenty, as a matter of fact. In any case, so just give you a little background there, but he was born up there. The family had a farm. He had 8 siblings, 5 of whom survived past infancy. That was fairly normal back in the first decade or so of the 20th century. Some of y'all certainly know that. When he was 11 years old, his mother passed away. It was a horrible situation for him. He kept a portrait of her by his bedside right up until the day he died. And I don't think he ever really totally, frankly, recovered from that, to be honest with you. His father married the lady that came in the house to nurse the mother, who was sick for a year or two, and then he died 2 years later at 13. And when that happened, I don't quite know all the details. Again, it was way before me. It was way before my mom, but the family was left with absolutely nothing. Now, this is roughly 20, if I'm getting my math right, 1913, 1914. There was no safety net, I think is the term we use. There was no safety net of any kind of thing. The only place to turn for help was family and maybe the church. He had one brother who was a couple of years older than him, Roy, and he went off on his own. And then he had three surviving younger siblings, Grover, Carrie, and Annie. They were taken in by family members. And my dad was too young to go off on his own, and there was nobody to take him in. It wasn't because they were bad people, didn't love him, but I mean, they were poor folks. A long time ago, there was no help. So he ended up at a Presbyterian orphanage called the Dorlian Bell Presbyterian School in Walnut, North Carolina. It's up in Madison County also. And it gets a little nebulous after that as just to what happened. He ended up at another Presbyterian orphanage, the Asheville Farm School, which was, and then he ended up graduating from Swannanoa High School. And want to add one more thing real quick, as my mom used to say, he gave away more money than he kept. And the Presbyterian Church, and particularly Presbyterian orphanages, were very, very important to him. And as he went on and he was successful in business, he donated a tremendous amount of money to the Presbyterian orphanage in South Carolina. Thornwell Orphanage in Clinton, South Carolina, was very, 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 very important to him. So I mentioned, like, it's a little unclear just to what happened. Growing up as a kid, the story my dad always gave me was I quit. I didn't go past the 6th grade in school. That's what he always told me. My dad loved the TV show The Beverly Hillbillies, and I would watch it with him. And by the way, if you're old enough to remember when the show first started, the old black and white episodes, it really did look like my dad's family because they were from East Tennessee and he was from Western North Carolina. Anyway, Jethro, one of the characters in there, always talked about he graduated the 6th grade. I always wondered, is that real or is he just trying to be Jethro? Anyway, going through some old books one time, and I was maybe 9 or 10. We actually have a copy of it here at the library. What is it called, Jen? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
It involves the Low Country, South Carolina.
South Carolina's Low Country. Anyway, found the book and I read through, and it explained that he had graduated from Swannanoa High School. So I took the book to him, and I basically said, "So what gives? I mean, what's the story?" And he looked at me and he said, "I got to clean this up a little bit." He goes, "Who are you going to believe, me or some damn book? You mean your father or some damn book?" Anyway, so it appears he did graduate from Swannanoa High School. I'm trying to think. You think anything we were leaving out about the early years? Any stories that jump out? Anyway, I think, frankly, a lot of what he accomplished in life was because of what happened. I don't think he ever really. By the way, I told Jen this when we started. I'm being very honest about him, okay? Because he was, and this is, I think, anyone would agree. He really was an accomplished man. He accomplished a heck of a lot, okay? So there's no need. He's been gone a long time, but he was never much of a spinner. But there's no need to, I mean, it just was what it was. And the loneliness and everything, the abandonment, with that early age really influenced him a great deal. And there was a profound sadness in him, although if you knew him, you'd think he was the most happy, upbeat guy in the world. He could turn it on. But also I think a lot of what he did for other people and for the community, he was just driven to kind of make up for it. Because he didn't want other people to feel left out, is the word. But in any case, one thing I should mention too, I mentioned this to so many folks, but my dad would not want me doing this, okay? Have I said that already to y'all? No. He would not want me doing this, okay? He was like, we did it, we moved on, yada, yada, yada. Would not want to do it. My mom, however, was really bothered and hurt by the fact that there's not a lot around in the community about him. So she's very much for it. So anyway, I think he's willing to let me do this because it means so much to my mom. But he did make a little deal with me. A couple of things I've got to talk about that are not really off subject. I've got to mention some people in his life who were very influential as we go along and take a moment to talk about them. So please, as a courtesy to him, allow me to do that. And then also there's one other thing at the end that I'm going to talk about, which is directly from him. But anyway, his mother's younger sister, May Treadway Ledbetter, she wasn't able to take him in, but he would go there on holidays, and she became a second mother to him. He took care of her, so he would definitely want me. Can I try to do them chronologically as they come up? But he would definitely want me to mention her. I know none of y'all have ever met her, whatever, but again, he wants me to do that. So I'm gonna mention how wonderful Aunt May was. So anyway, we get to he left one way or the other. We left Swannanoa High School, and at that point, it gets a little hard to understand just kind of how it all played out. My mom, I should mention, because our family tree is like craziest thing in the world. Okay, so he was 59 when I was born. My mom was 20 years younger than he was. So anyway, but basically, at this point, it's important to talk about a family from Madison County, the Martins. Vesta Martin, who was a daughter, was my dad's first wife, and they were together many, many years. Produced 3 wonderful, wonderful children. My step siblings, Jack, Marion, and Nina. I met Vesta, I think, while he would have still been in high school, but I'm never really sure. Her father, a man named Reverend Jake Martin, who I didn't get to meet, my mom did, but I knew the family very, very well. took him under his wing, and they were very, very close. Now, again, some of you folks like me are up in years a little bit, so you probably grasp what I'm talking about. You remember how churches used to be, people didn't choose which church to go to based on who has the best preschool or what will help them get the most promotions at their job. I mean, there were differences. Your Presbyterians, Baptists, Methodists, they all got along, but they had some doctrinal differences, okay? Well, as I mentioned, my dad was a dyed-in-the-wool Presbyterian. Absolutely. Have any of you seen the movie 41 about Jackie Robinson? Has anybody seen that? A few of you have. There's a line in there, you may remember, when the actor who's playing Branch Rickey is signing Jackie Robinson to come play for the Brooklyn Dodgers, and he's trying to build up a rapport with him. And he looks at him and he goes, Jackie, he goes, we have a lot in common. He goes, I'm a Methodist. You're a Methodist. God's a Methodist. I think about that's how my dad felt about being Presbyterian. So anyway, Reverend Martin was a Baptist minister. My dad was a good orator, and he was very, very close to him. So he was what was called a circuit preacher. Churches up in these little tiny towns didn't have church or have a minister every Sunday. He rotated around to different churches. So he hired my dad and trained him to go around and preach, to kind of, to be like an assistant, okay? So picture, if you will, it's like 1918, we're up in the mountains of North Carolina, and my dad is going into these Baptist churches preaching, but he's preaching predestination. And again, if you know anything about the history of denominations, that's the exact opposite of the way the Baptists feel. So I never heard him say it, but my mom did, and several of my dad's brothers and sisters-in-law from his first marriage, who we were all very close to, talk about Reverend Martin saying the hardest thing he ever had to do was to sit down and say, Jap, I'm sorry, son, this just isn't working. This just is not going to work. And he said, I knew Jap well enough to know he wasn't going to change, but he goes, I was going to be out of a job. So anyway, that was the end of my dad's career as a minister, but it was one of a number of occupations that he did have in his life. Speaking of occupation, again, I'm not sure when he and Vesta married. So there were a couple of adventures he had. He was a coal miner for a while, and he drove a streetcar in Detroit. I'm not sure if at that point he was married to Vesta or not. I know many, many people from the South and from the mountains ended up in Detroit in the first quarter of the 20th century for jobs. So that is a true story, I do know. But somehow ended up in those two places. And then he ended up in Marion, North Carolina. I think it's somewhere up around Blowing Rock, that area, so to speak. Let's see, we're not to that slide yet, so we're good there. He ended up there in, I guess, would be the early 20s. So he was still a very, very young man, and he and Vesta at that point were married. And again, this is getting into the probably a little more minutia than's needed, but you're here, it's not raining, it's warm. And again, I've got to deal with my dad. I got to mention these folks, okay? A gentleman named G.P. Siegel came into his life. And I don't know how they met. Mr. Siegel was a good bit older than my father. I don't really know how the relationship began. I do know my dad. My dad was a very polite person. I mean, he was going to treat, a garbage collector or somebody who signed shoes for a living the same way he would treat the governor. But Mr. Siegel was the only person. He used to come visit us a little bit before he passed away when I was a little kid. I remember my dad was just like he would just sit and just look at him and just listen and soak in every word. So anyway, I don't know how they met, but Mr. Siegel was a huge, huge part of his life. So somehow my dad ended up running a construction company, a road construction, heavy industry company called Ramsey Construction. I don't remember whether Mr. Siegel was his partner, whether Mr. Siegel maybe was like a lender. But in any case, Mr. Siegel was behind it. And then we're getting to how he ended up in Myrtle Beach. He had a contract with the state of North Carolina in around 1925, 1926 to pay what's now called US 17 from the river in Wilmington to the Brunswick County, South Carolina line. And now we're getting into, I've left something very, very important out. I've got to go back. Sorry, heart's in the right place. This is hugely important. And some of you have lived in Myrtle Beach for a while, it's very important to your lives too, but you don't know it, okay? Back when my dad was a little kid, before his parents died, on the farm, there was another family that lived on the farm, the Davises. I'm not sure whether they were sharecroppers or they were employees of my dad's father. I'm not sure. In any case, there was a little boy named Felix. He was the same age as my dad. They were very, very close. They played together. They worked together. Somehow, after they lost the farm, everybody moved away. I don't know how he did it. My dad managed to stay in touch with Felix Davis. That's going to be really, really important to our story, okay? And again, if you live in Myrtle Beach, you have no idea the impact Felix Davis had on your life. But let's jump ahead back now to the mid 1920s. He's got this business, which I think Mr. Siegel was his silent partner at worst, if not more. Had the contract to pave US 17? Well, it's now US 17, all the way to Little River. And just this is one of a number of, it's amazing how things work out, things in my dad's life. Right as he was finishing up, the state of South Carolina opened bids to grade and pave Kings Highway from the North Carolina line to the Waccamaw River just east of Georgetown, where the bridge is. And he got that contract. The dates are a little fuzzy. I've heard 26, 27, 28. So he got started doing that, and right as he's doing that, I'm assuming a lot of you folks, even if you aren't lifetime residents here, have heard about the Ocean Forest Hotel and how important it was to us. There's a family, two gentlemen named the Woodsides from Greenville who were behind it. It was a massive, massive investment. The only thing that's still standing from it is Pine Lakes Country Club. Anyway, was starting to work on making that, and this is where we get into the hotel here, making that happen. When my dad had a construction company, he had people who worked for him, and he had trucks, and he had bulldozers. So the Woodsides hired him to build some of the road infrastructure around the Ocean Forest Hotel and Pine Lakes and all that. So he got that job. And then as he's getting into that, they were getting ready to break ground on the building, and they needed somebody to haul raw equipment from the train station, which Jack Thompson saved, from the train station up to the Ocean Forest Hotel. So he got that contract. So at that point, he settled down and bought a house here. If you're locals, you know where I'm talking about. Just north of 6th Avenue on Kings Highway, just above where the post office is now. There's a lot there. If you've got a few years old, you remember it was Harry Pavlik's law offices. Anyway, that's where that's where their home was, and he settled in Myrtle Beach. Let's see, where do we go to next? Oh, I do want to mention, this is a story. I was able to confirm a lot of stories I had heard, thanks to the wonderful, wonderful collection of information they have here at the library. Jen, Laura, the reference librarian. I wasn't able to confirm this, but I've always heard it, so I think it's true. And if you're local, you know about this. As he was doing the work for the Woodsides, despite all the employees he had and all the equipment, he was having trouble keeping up. And there was a young man who was just starting out in the heavy construction. This is the story. I could be wrong, and the families are around. If they tell you this is not right, they're right. But I couldn't confirm, but I've always heard this, so I think it's true. They were just starting out. It was a young man named Jasper Benton. And my dad needed help, and Jasper came in and helped him finish the job. And my dad recommended him to the Woodsides to do the grading and everything for the actual golf course at what became Pine Lakes Country Club. And that business grew into C.L. Benton and Sons. Jimmy Benton, Casper's son, ran it for many years. His sons, Lawton and Carson, who I went to school with, Miss Taylor taught, are still running it. So again, that is the story I always heard. I can't confirm it if Lawton and Carson have heard it differently. So anyway, apparently something great still helping Myrtle Beach out. He had a little hand in starting. So we're in the early 30s now. Okay, and so some of you are, none of us are quite. We've been around for a while, so you probably know your history. What was going on in America from the 1920s to the early 30s? It didn't go on any time before or since. Does anybody know? Prohibition. Thank you. Okay, so if you know that, you may well know that President Kennedy's father, Joe Kennedy, made his first fortune doing the Lord's work, bootlegging Cutty Sark whiskey into the United States. Anyway, early 1930s, obviously because I think Prohibition was gone by 33, 34, 35, one of his boats shipwrecked right here in Myrtle Beach. And again, I always heard this story, but I've had it confirmed by a number of people. The son of the first mayor, Mayor Harrelson, spoke in one of these series and confirmed this is true too. It's shipwrecked. So basically what it is, it's free kegs of scotch all over the beach. Now, one man happened to live 2 blocks from the beach and happened to have a bunch of trucks and a bunch of strong men with strong arms. So they went down and apparently they got the lion's share of it. And again, I wasn't around then, but it's been confirmed to me by independent people, buried it in his backyard. And he was a clever fellow, despite the fact that he claimed he didn't go past the 6th grade. He waited a while and sold it off along, and I'm told made a ton of money, sort of collaborating and selling Mr. Kennedy's scotch. So anyway, so I don't know whether the funds from that provided what happened next. Let's, Mark, if you don't mind, there we are. New Way Laundry. This was, my dad had a lot of businesses in his life, but this was maybe the one that was nearest and dearest to his heart. It opened in 1930. Literally, if you look out this window here, you'll see a place called the Olympic Flame Pancake House. That's where it was located. Guys, if I'm not talking into the mic, yell at me.
You're doing great.
Okay, thank you. Started in 1930 with 6 employees, 1 truck, and 1 unit there, and kept it until the mid-1960s. Grew it into, it says, I think he had over 200 employees as we went into the 1960s. Started out as a laundry, became dry cleaners, became linen supply, became a lot of things like that. Really was the business was like a number of people who worked with him virtually almost the entire time that they were together, all those many years. You can see photographs of some of them. The Bellamy brothers, R.D. Brigham, Archie Taylor, Grace, A.C. Platt, folks who are long gone now, but it was really the love of his life. That was it. They eventually moved over to on what is now Broadway. It was West Broadway then, the New Laundry building in the late 40s. But it was his. He did a lot of different things, but that really was his heart and soul. And the people who worked there were like his. They just meant everything in the world to him. Mark, I think, can we go up one more slide? This is a Christmas party in the early late 40s, early 1950s of everybody that worked at laundry. As you can see, the area was designed to be functional, not beautiful. But this is some of the crew, many who were with him for many years. This is my mom right here. I always say I love this picture because it's perfectly where she is. She's right behind him, just barely looking over her shoulder, and that's where she always was. And if I won't be going through all this picture, there are the 4 or 5 siblings of his, siblings of my mom. I mean, it was just these were his people. He used to have nightmares when I was a kid. He always had them. And my mom would say, don't wake him. And he would sit up in bed, and it was the same the same recurring dream over and over. He was on a cattle drive, okay? And they were driving cattle, and he was the boss. He was directing them. But the people he were talking to were the gentlemen that you saw there, the Brighams and the Taylors and those folks. That was how his subconscious blew off steam. In any case, that was a very, very important part of his life. And he kept it up until the mid-60s when he sold the laundry to a gentleman named Lambo Schwartz. You folks who are local knew Lambo very much. And Lambo's somebody else I need to talk about in my little deal with my dad. He and my father were not close, but Lambo very much took up the mantle of my dad. He told me once after my dad passed away that he never said this to anybody. He goes, as I came to Myrtle Beach and I got to know about your father, I kind of felt a responsibility since I owned his business to try to carry it on. I hope I did okay, and he did. So I just want to get that out there for those of you who knew Lambo, and if you're like me, loved Lambo. In any case, so it's the early 30s. He always needed to have his hands in a lot of different things. So it's no surprise that he was hired by Horry County as superintendent of relief work. This is again the middle of the Depression for 2 years. Didn't take a salary. That's documented in places other than just my dad talking. He would have not told that story, but some people had. He worked for free. According to the newspapers at the time, they employed up to 5,000 citizens at one time, doing things like building roads, sewers, playgrounds to get the infrastructure going and giving people a way to feed their families. I don't know what the population of Horry County was in 1930. It was more than 5,000, but I know when he was mayor in the early 50s, it was barely 50,000. So it's a big segment of the population. He was in charge of that. And let's see, looking at my notes here, that was just. So now we're okay. Here we go. Now we're getting some good stuff. So we're rolling into 1938. Oh, the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, give me just a second here, folks, to wander through my notes. Okay, so yeah, so at 37 and 38, 2 things going on. One, my dad founded the Myrtle Beach Chamber of Commerce. He was the first person, as I mentioned to you, ever to be re-elected mayor, and he was also the only person ever to serve 2 terms as chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. And started in, I think he was 38 and 39 were the 2 years that he was chairman. There's some wonderful stuff in the great archives that Jen and Laura have here, if you'd like to go ahead and look at yourself, about my dad's involvement there. There's a gentleman named P.G. Winstead. his son is still with us, but this is PG Senior talking. I think it was in 1951 at some type of a chamber a meeting, and he was talking about, because a lot of you don't know this. He goes, Jap is the Chamber of Commerce's daddy. He goes, actually, he's Myrtle Beach's daddy. But he said he was chairman for 2 years at no salary. We had no secretary. He did all that. He was handyman. He did everything. And even though after 38 or 39, he relinquished the reins of chairman, he also stayed very, very involved in very involved in the chamber. It was near and dear to his heart. He used them to help get things through when he was mayor, and to help get the convention center built. We'll talk about it more a little bit later. The other big thing that was going on as we get into 37, 38 was the drive from Myrtle Beach to incorporate as a town. The story that everybody knows, it's true, is that there was a committee for incorporation, which my dad was the chairman of, which is true. And there was an election, and incorporation passed, which was a wonderful victory. And then my dad ran against Dr. Harrelson for mayor and lost. I found two different newspaper stories. Some say he lost by 11 votes. Some say he lost by 36. But anyway, that's the official story, and that's true. But you got to dig a little bit. And who wrote the book that tells us about that, Gian? Is that Lester Sue's book? It's about the 37?
Barbara Stokes.
Barbara Stokes' book tells the story. In 37, the year before, there was an incorporation vote that lost. Nobody ever talks about that. But lost in the sands of time. But Barbara Stokes, a wonderful history book on Myrtle Beach, tells us about it. My dad was on the committee, but he wasn't the chairman. It was a really convoluted thing. It was people who owned land but didn't live in the city were allowed to vote. And at the time you went in to vote for incorporation or not, or against incorporation, you also voted for council members. And it had to be split up. 2 of them had to be out-of-towners who owned land. 3 of them had to vote. It was kind of a screwy kind of thing. You kind of see why I lost, to be honest with you. Anyway, but at the same time, they voted for council members. And the way it was supposed to work is once they chose the 5 council members, then we're going to choose a mayor. Anyway, what I'm getting at is my dad won that election. He got more votes than anybody else. He was elected to that first council, but the council had no town to govern. So he did win the first election ever in Myrtle Beach. And again, he would say this privately, but he wouldn't want to say it publicly. But he would say it privately. You know, when I ran the incorporation vote won, he would have never said that publicly. So anyway, Dr. Harrelson was the first mayor, did a wonderful job, and my dad thought the world of him. There are no hard feelings there at all. So let's go back and kind of figure out things a little bit more on the chamber. The chamber went dormant during World War II. Afterwards, it started back up. My dad was very, very involved in that. We had 3 wonderful Chamber of Commerce directors. I think it's called president now. It's the guy who runs things, or woman, the person who runs things on a day-to-day basis. The 3 of them were Mark Garner, James Gray, and Fred Brinkman. And my dad was instrumental in hiring all 3 of them. Again, this is a couple of people my dad wants me to mention. Mark Garner was a hugely important man in the history of Myrtle Beach. And my dad was extremely proud that he brought him here and hired him as head of the chamber. He left after a few years. Mayor Garner and his old college roommate, Horace Carter from UNC, started up bought the Myrtle Beach newspaper and the Tabor City newspaper. But he still stayed very, very involved in the chamber and very, very close to my dad. Eventually was elected mayor in the mid-'60s. And also Fred Brinkman, who succeeded he and a gentleman named James Gay. My dad hired Fred Brinkman, too. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. Did a great job for many, many years, and then became the head of the South Carolina PRT, the whole Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. I know this is kind of off subject, but I've got to deal with my dad. I've got to do it. When he took over in the early 70s, their basic job was they were park rangers. They ran the state parks and turned it into the huge machine that just generates so much tourist money and everything for South Carolina. Just a wonderful, wonderful man. And I'm really proud to say they just thought the world of my father. Had a chance to get to know them, many years later, even after my dad passed away. Mr. Brinkman lived in Columbia. Used to have me over for dinner when I was in college. But it's just, loved my dad, and the feeling was absolutely mutual. But anyway, they got the chamber going again. As my dad had set it up when he started it back in 38, they had committees for tourism, but also committees for industrial development. I mean, my dad made a lot of money off of tourists in this town. It was a very, very important part of it. But the goal always was for him was to create jobs for the locals who lived here. It was a means to an end, not a not an end in of itself with tourism. So he had committees for industrial development, he has committees for tourism development. And when he got things going again after World War II, he set it up the same way. He was the chairman of the committee that started what became the Sun Fun Festival, which started in 51 or 52. I looked everywhere. There was a picture, a newspaper clipping in our family archives, but it's gone. Mark, help me look.
I've got that somewhere. So.
We haven't found it yet. But,
Well, it's in my archives.
okay.
So.
Well, maybe we can post it on the Myrtle Beach history page. It's a photograph of the 1950 or 51 Carolina's Carousel Christmas Parade in Charlotte. It was a huge, the biggest event of the Christmas season throughout the two Carolinas, and it was televised on WBTV Channel 3 in Charlotte, which then you could get all over. Nobody else had TV stations. Anyway, it's a great picture of him on a float, and he's wearing one of those old-fashioned, like, gay 90s bathing suits, like a T-shirt you see with no sleeves and red and white stripes. It was just a great picture. We'll get it up on the Myrtle Beach history page for you to see. But it'll give you an idea of how far he was willing to go to promote Myrtle Beach, because that was not his style. That is absolutely for sure. So let's see. We're moving into the early 40s now. Sure, Mark, do you mind? Let me see what's next here on our slideshow that Jen put together for us. Okay, yeah, this is a picture of my dad at a reception for him in the early 60s. This is Jerry Poster, who, by the way, my dad hired and brought to Myrtle Beach, and Fred Brinkman, whom I mentioned, with the chamber there. Can we see what's next? Thank you, sir. Okay, we're going to be at the Dunes Club in a minute. We're not there quite yet. A couple of other things my dad was involved in. I got to sit down for a second and take off my paperclip here. He served on the Selective Service Board during World War II in Horry County. And in 1947, he, along with his buddies Buster Bryan and Joe Ivy, were among the founders of the Dunes Club. My dad, I should tell you, never played a round of golf in his life. Never played a round of golf in his life. Unlike Buster and Joe, who were very, very good friends of his, they were his best friends, who absolutely embraced golf. He got involved because he was kind of the guy, and he got involved to help promote it, and also too another little adventure he was working on. We'll get into in a minute, trying to bring industrial development here, and he learned that having Pine Lakes was in bad shape, wasn't doing well. It was important to have a nice golf course community to attract industry, because CEOs like to live in nice places. Anyway, so he got involved. He was chairman of the building committee. This is him right here at the groundbreaking. And Mark, you can see his hair really was red. We're not kidding here. This is Joe Ivy. Again, he met the world too. This is Jimmy D'Angelo, the first pro there. I'm not sure which of the gentlemen is Buster Bryan, but those were two gentlemen who did a great deal for Myrtle Beach also. And they were very, very, very dear friends of my dad. And pretty much everything he did in public life, which he's about to get into as mayor, they were right there with him every step of the way. So a very, very proud thing. This is the original clubhouse there that Jen did an amazing job of finding the sketches of. And I think it was the clubhouse well into the 70s and the 80s, since been replaced. But that was his involvement there. He sold his stock in the Dunes Club, I think, in the mid-50s. Again, he didn't play golf, and anyway, but he did it more for Joe and for Buster and for Myrtle Beach and Horry County. But it was certainly something we're very proud of, and he was very proud of it and his friendship with Buster and Joe. And it's been an amazing attention getter for Myrtle Beach also. So we're getting ready to his run for mayor, which was elected in November 5th of 1949. But before that, the Army Air Corps base here in Myrtle Beach had closed in, I believe it was November of 1947. And the city said it had been a municipal airport. You locals know that before it was the Air Force Base. Set up an airport commission to find out what they were going to do with it. Obviously, a huge blow to the economy. So my dad and Joe Ivy were appointed to the committee. I don't quite get why this happened, but just try to get all the facts out. Joe was the chairman. And then after a couple of months, my dad took over. Anyway, so he jumped in with both feet, as he always did, to try and promote Myrtle Beach. From the day he took the job, his main goal was to get the Air Force Base back, but he had no clue how in the world he was going to do it. So he got to work on other things. He's always said, "Don't put all your eggs in one basket." There were turkey farms out there, which you hear a lot of mention about. They set out to bring baseball spring training. They interviewed all 16 of the then major league teams, and they were able to get 2 teams to visit: the Boston Braves, long before they were in Atlanta, and also the Cleveland Indians. And the Braves decided to take them up on the offer to come and bring all their minor league teams there. They were only there for a few years. We'll get to why in a little while. The brief time they were there, a couple of Hall of Famers were out there in spring training, a gentleman named Hank Aaron, and Eddie Matthews, and some other famous folks too. In any case, got that there. But he was also working on industrial development. And this is where I mentioned, like, there were a lot of fortuitous things in my life. The fact that, he got that job, didn't even know where Myrtle Beach was, building roads for North Carolina right as he did. South Carolina put out a contract. Then the Woodside got started. There's a lot of coincidences in his life. He actually, one of his favorite sayings was, I just think it's a coincidence. But anyway, this is where something gets interesting. So he's got all this land. He's trying to get something here. Myrtle Beach is a small town back then. It was hit hard by, World War II, the loss of the base. He's struggling to find things. Well, anyway, I mentioned to you about, his feelings on Presbyterianism. I mentioned that earlier, okay? And he brought his whole family. It had to be 20 or 30 people from Madison County came down to Myrtle Beach and worked for him or worked somewhere else. He brought them all down here. One of them was a cousin of his named Marie McGee, who later, by the way, would be a librarian here with Shirley Boone for many, many years, along with her daughter Mary, a wonderful, wonderful person. This place was very important to us. It's really cool. I'm getting to talk about Marie here in Chapin Library. But anyway, during the war, she was dating an airman from a place called Watertown, New York. Anyway, how can I clean this up and tell the story and not be offensive? Because if it says anything bad, it's just something bad about him. Anyway, Marie went to him because he was sort of a surrogate dad. And she said, Jap, Mac? And he said, yeah. She goes, I think he's about to ask me to marry him. And she said, my dad looked at him, and she goes, I could see he was trying to suppress a laugh when he said it. He goes, you want to marry a Yankee? And a damn Catholic on top of it? But anyway, he gave her blessing, and it was a really, really good thing he did. Because we're fast forwarding a few years later. He's chairman of the airport commission right before he runs for mayor. And he's over on Sunday afternoon at Mac and Marie's house talking about the need for industrial development. Mac mentions, he goes, in the town where I'm from, Watertown, there's a company called Airvox, and they build ceramic capacitors. He goes, they're looking to expand as the economy was picking up after World War II. He goes, they want to go places where there aren't unions. They're looking. I heard they want to, get out of New York. Or their expansion, add locales to New York. And he goes, maybe they'd be interested in coming to Myrtle Beach. So he told my dad the name of the company called Airvox. And he goes, I'll reach out. I'll get my mom and dad to look into it a little bit for you. So he's thinking, well, that's interesting. I don't know what capacitors are. It is, and I've never heard of Airvox, but he was going to pursue, look under any rock, of course. So anyway, he went home, and this is how he told the story. He's thinking about it. Airvox, that sounds familiar. Why do I know the name of that company? A gentleman named William Kimball, did a great deal for this beach also. The ones who were local, coastal Carolina wouldn't exist if it weren't for Mr. Kimball. He and my dad were very, very different people. Again, my dad either, graduated from an orphanage or left school in the 6th grade. Mr. Kimball was a 4-time student body president at Columbia University. And very, very different people. But he had a home down in Georgetown County. And when they were putting the Dudes Club together, they recruited Mr. Kimball to be an investor in it. So they got to know him. They got along fine. They weren't the kind of people who were going to spend time together. They just were very, very different folks. Anyway, as soon as he remembered hearing Mr. Kimball say something about Airvox. So he reached out to him. And Mr. Kimball said, well, yeah, as a matter of fact, he goes, I'm a stockholder in Airvox, and I'm, kind of involved in the operations. He goes, I understand. He told him the story about Mac McGee, the damn Catholic. And he said, do you think there might be an opportunity here to make it work? Well, Mr. Kimball, again, if you know the history of him and everything, even though we were his adopted home, he would do anything in the world for Myrtle Beach. He got all on it, and they jumped in, and they worked like crazy, and they managed to get it here to Myrtle Beach. Can we go back a little bit? I'm not sure if you don't mind. Okay, we got a running for mayor. Back before that, no?
No, I think must have had it out of order.
That's okay. Okay, here we go. They got Airbox here. It opened in 1948. They employed 25 people, I believe, at their opening. By this ad is from Airbox Thinking, Myrtle Beach. This is from 1953. They were up to 1,500 employees. When my dad passed away in December of 1973, Airbox was the largest. It was 20 years later, or 20 years after my dad left office, 25 years after they were built here. They were the largest public employer in Horry County. And again, all because of Mac McHugh and frankly, Mr. Kimball too. The connection. We go down one more slide. Did some research today, and the Myrtle Beach Regional Economic Development Commission, they're the people that go out and recruit industry. Today, 75 years after they opened, 50 years after my dad passed away, they eventually changed their name to AVX. You know how companies, get funky names like that. But it's the same company, Airbox. They're still the number one employee of industrial employees in Horry County. And for all these years. How cool is that, huh? That gives me chills. I don't know if it does y'all, but I think that's absolutely amazing. Again, just got a lot to tell you about here, so we're going to jump in. Mr. Siegel gets involved again. My dad opens a business in 1947 with Mr. Siegel called the Myrtle Beach Lumber Company. And Pine Lakes was apparently close to going under. And so they purchased the back 9 from Fred Miles. Mr. Miles used the money to keep Pine Lakes going. And they cleared the timber, sold the land to John McLeod, another local businessman and realtor who my dad did a lot of different ventures with. And the residential development, I think I'm right, just south of Pine Lakes on Pine Lake Drive, that's where it was. They used the land for timber and sold it. And Mr. McLeod developed that area, and he gave Mr. Miles the money to keep Pine Lakes going. And they would eventually come back and expand it later. And he and Mr. Siegel kept that for a number of years, sold it in 1953. So again, getting those kind of things out. So let's go back a little bit. I'm sorry. A little bit more. Let's go back to a little bit more. I'm going to go back to the campaign poster, if you don't mind. Mark.
The other back.
Please. And then we'll skip over there. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, 1949, my dad decided to run for mayor, and I've got the election here. He won 58% of the vote, 416 to 305. He ran on a campaign of bringing the base back, getting the city finances in shape, and fixing the water and sewer system, which he had put a lot into building back in the 30s, but it's since fallen into disrepair. This is a campaign ad from when he ran for re-election, but I found this astounding. When he took office on November 15th, 1949, this is what the city's ledger looked like. $41,000 in notes payable, $68,343.28 in unpaid bills, for total liabilities of $100,343.28. That was big money in 1949. Meanwhile, their assets were, that's right, $402.77 in cash on hand and nothing else. And I can assure you, when he ran for mayor the second time around and used this, the Sun News came in and investigated. Those numbers are absolutely. So he inherited a mess. The city hall had been started under the previous mayor, Mayor Talavast, but it wasn't finished. I don't know the story. I knew they ran out of money. I don't know if it wasn't finished because they ran out of money. It was sitting there, or if the contractors were still working on it, but it's still going to be tremendously in debt. Anyway, so he inherited a lot of problems. But he rolled up his sleeves and he got to work. He had a wonderful group of council members working with him. Can we go a little forward here, Mark? I'm sorry to bounce you around like this. You're a good sport. Find. We can go back. I can find him in this. Really, just a sec, guys. Sorry to be so informed. This is really important. His first term, Eli Bennett, Furman Hardy, Colonel T.M. Jordan, Phil Gray, Wayne's great-grandfather, I believe, Sam Gardner and Jimmy Porter. And then the second administration, E.P. Brodell, Sam Gardner, Phil Gray, Ernie Williams, H. Lloyd Macklin, and Jimmy Porter, the council members. And he was always quick to give them enormous, sorry, I forgot the mic. He was always quick to give them enormous thanks for all their support, everything they accomplished. This is a council meeting at the old Colonial Building because the City Hall wasn't finished yet. So he got started in 1949, rolled up his sleeves. Go back to my notes here. He always had a lot of balls in the air. A lot of balls in the air. Again, he had Airvox here, and he was working on continuing with the Airport Commission. He started, as Mark and I learned, the first billboard ordinances, a campaign called Clean Up, Paint Up, Fix Up. And I think it was kind of a heavy hand. I think you better clean up, paint up, or fix up, or you're going to get visited by someone from the city. Used tax money to finance tourism promotion, which was controversial then as it is now. His philosophy was just get it done. Anyway, that first year they got the City Hall and the police and fire station open, and those are still in use today by the city. And he was also working with to get commercial air service to Myrtle Beach. There had been an airfield, just a private, for private planes before the Army came in to build the Army Air Corps base. It fell back in the city's lap. They had some private aviation. But anyway, he worked on getting a Piedmont Airlines scheduled to come in and bring commercial flights. I think we got a picture of that, Mark, if you'll go forward a little bit. Jen, can you remember? There it is, the proudest moment of my life, he said in 1950, when the first commercial air flight into Myrtle Beach came on Piedmont Airlines. This is my dad right here. So he had a lot of success there. But in the back of his mind, he's still after that Air Force base, guys. I mean, that was his, his great white whale. They worked on a number of things. I did not know this. I learned it going through Jen and Laura's amazing archives, but they worked with the Air Force. And some of you may know, the Air Force was part of the Army until after World War II. So obviously there was no Air Force Academy like there was West Point and Annapolis. So the Air Force, as it became a separate entity, was working on building an academy. They worked really hard to try to get them to build it here, but they just didn't. They just did not get anywhere. So my dad started working on going to the politicians to try to see about getting the Air Force Base back. He started out by going to, this was before there were county councils. The county legislative delegation ran the county. He went to Senator James P. Stevens, who was the powerhouse in Horry County for many years. Got absolutely nowhere with him. Went to the Congressman John McMillan in Florence. Got absolutely nowhere with him whatsoever. Went to the governor, a fellow named Strom Thurmond, who was very kind and courteous to my dad, always was, but got absolutely nowhere. And what they all told him was, you had that base, and this is where we're going to get into what very few people know about, okay? But I've been able to document. I'm really glad I could. The thing they kept telling him is, you had that base and you ran them off. And the thing was that World War II ended, which is true. Military downsized, they left Myrtle Beach, but he was being told that wasn't the case. So anyway, he struck out with everybody. He doesn't know what the world he's going to do. Remember I mentioned that young man named Felix Davis back there? Well, my dad wound up in Myrtle Beach, and somehow Mr. Davis ended up in North Charleston. And like my dad, he went on to achieve a good bit of professional and financial success. And again, somehow my dad, he managed to stay in touch. I have no idea how it happened. No idea how in the world it happened. Anyway, as he was growing up there, he met a young man who was an attorney whose name was L. Mendel Rivers. And I think we have Congressman Rivers. Let's see, back there. The very handsome gentleman.
Go back the other
Was
direction.
that the one? Okay.
Let's see. There we go, right there. We had him right there, yeah. A man named L. Mendel Rivers, who happened to run for Congress in the 30s and get elected. He would eventually become chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. At this time, in 1949 or so, I think he's the number 2 Democrat on the committee. Again, somehow he and Felix Davis were best friends in the whole world. So my dad put in a call to his old friend Felix Davis and asked him for help. Again, keep in mind, head of the county legislation, you're crazy. There's no chance of getting this. Congressman McMillan up over in Florence, Jap, you're wasting your time. Governor Thurmond, same thing. Jap, you're wasting your time. No, there's no way. Well, again, he had it in with the number 2 person on the House Armed Services Committee, L. Mendel Rivers, who jumped in with both feet. And there's no mention anywhere, in the history of Myrtle Beach about my dad's efforts, or equally important, the efforts of Congressman Rivers. But the good news is, thanks to Jen and Laura, it's all up there in the newspaper. And as you read through the stories from the 3-year odyssey they went on to try to get the base back, Congressman Rivers is there every moment. And I'm sure a lot of people wonder, why in the world is Charleston's congressman, and we've always had a rivalry with Charleston, why is he working so darn hard to get here? Well, the reason is because he, like my dad, had a best friend named Felix Davis. It was a long, 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 long road. The first documentation I can find of them having a trip in the newspapers of their efforts was a trip to Washington in January of 1951. My dad and a committee, people from the chamber, people from the council, to meet with the Pentagon about trying to bring the Air Force Base back. They were hosted there, according to the newspaper articles, by Congressman L. Mendel Rivers. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because I wouldn't have said this if I couldn't find the documentation for it. So give me a moment while I read you a little bit of what they learned at that meeting and what they told the Myrtle Beach newspapers that was printed. Excuse me, just a second. Am I boring you to death? I am. I truly am sorry. Okay, one of these is from the Myrtle Beach. One of these is from the Myrtle Beach Sun. One of them is from the Myrtle Beach News. They have different papers then. January 26, 1951. At a special meeting of the City Fathers last Friday night, a spokesman for a delegation of local officials who recently went to Charleston to ascertain the current status of the Myrtle Beach Airport reported that, quote, for some reason unknown, Myrtle Beach was not being considered for any activity at this time due to the fact that some person or persons compelled or influenced the Army Air Corps to abandon the air base, close quote. The Air Force informed the delegation they definitely wanted to keep Myrtle Beach Air Base as a permanent installation when they were here before. Sorry. Mayor Jasper Ramsey expressed regret that anyone would oppose reactivation of the base. He said, quote, it is very essential during this time in emergency, not only to the war effort, but to the economy of Myrtle Beach, that the air base be reactivated in some form or other as soon as possible. Every effort is being made and will continue to be made to get the Air Force Base back. Members of council were surprised to learn that pressure had been brought by some person or persons to prevent the reactivation of the airport. I'm not quite sure if they were telling them there were people behind what I'd always heard to cause the base to leave in the first place, or an actual opposition to the reactivation effort. I'm not sure which of the. I think it's a little unclear, frankly. In the other newspaper, there's an interview with Jimmy Porter, who I mentioned was one of the council members with my dad. Let me see here. He says, let's consider the history of the closing of the air base by the Air Force. It is an established fact that the Air Force very reluctantly gave it up. It was quite a shock to me when we were told by a high-ranking Air Force official in Washington, on the ship I talked about, that he could not understand us asking them to return when they were here before and wanted very much to stay and had permanent plans for it, but high-level political pressure forced them out. In trying to soothe the situation, I, meaning Mr. Porter, personally remarked to the officer that there had been some changes in Myrtle Beach since then, and the answer from the officer was, quote, yes, but the malady lingers on. Then Mr. Councilman Porter goes on to say, I, for one, believe this pressure to get the Air Force Base had to start right here in Myrtle Beach. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to be fair, well, it gets into some political stuff then. So anyway, a couple of articles there. The first documented information I've heard my whole life this story from my mom and dad, but nobody ever talks about it. But it was documented in the local newspapers too. That the base, at least I think what happened, they're saying that the pressure to get the base to leave. I don't think it was anything against my dad's efforts at that time. So let's go back to our timeline here. My lovely assistant. Thank you, ma'am. There are a number of newspaper articles over the next 2 years about their efforts. I'm going to touch on those briefly, but want to swing on to some other things that my dad was involved in. When he came into office, the telephone service was terrible and the electrical service was terrible. So he immediately started out with his usual delicacy and carefulness, saying the city needs to buy the phone company, we need to buy the electrical operations for Santee Cooper and put them out of business and do it ourselves. It went in a couple of different directions. Seacoast Telephone Company worked really, really hard to upgrade the system. They fought back and forth over a couple of years. They wanted a 21-year franchise to come in and invest a bunch of money and bring direct dial phones and all that to Myrtle Beach. And my dad's response was, no, bring the direct dial phones, invest all the money, and then we'll talk about a long-term contract with you. And they were eventually able to get that to happen. Just one sec. Got a picture, I think is somewhere. I don't have it. Anyway, Seacoast invested an enormous amount of money and brought telephone dialing here to Myrtle Beach. Santee Cooper, the situation was a little bit different. They fought and fought and fought and fought and fought. It went well into my dad's second term, fighting with Santee Cooper. He pushed hard for a referendum for the city to vote to buy it, put a lot of effort into it. Did not go well. The referendum he actually canceled because a good politician can, smell the winds. And anyway, a group of people who were opposed to it went ahead and had a private referendum, and also like 568-6. Now, in defense of my dad's idea, he encouraged his supporters not to go vote because it didn't count. But still, anyway, clearly it wasn't what the people of Myrtle Beach were ready for. But he put enough pressure on Santee Cooper that they did come in, dramatically increase the system, quadruple the number of employees they had in Myrtle Beach in the mid-50s, built a new headquarters building and several down the road. So he didn't get exactly what he wanted, but he did get a substantial improvement in the electrical service, although it's stuck in his craw his whole life, and dramatic improvement from the telephone service. Now, if we can go back down, the plaque from Charlie's Place, Mark, if you don't mind. Okay, if you're local, you probably know about this. If you're out of town, you may not. Again, I swore when I started putting this together, I was going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly with my dad, okay? In July of 1950, over on the Booker T. Washington area, what was referred to as the Hill, there was a wonderful bar and hotel and restaurant called Charlie's Place. It was extremely successful. They had performers from all over the country came. Anyway, the Ku Klux Klan was very active in South Carolina in the late 40s and early 50s. And the Ku Klux Klan was planning a march in July of 1950. And they announced to the city they were going to be marching through. My dad ordered what he would have called, he used the word escort. He used a much less elegant term. Anyway, he ordered the police force to follow them through the whole situation to prevent a problem from occurring. They marched all the way through Myrtle Beach, according to newspaper accounts, then went over to Carver Street, where Charlie's Place was, and then left and went out of town. When they got past the city limits, the police force disbanded. Later, I think about 200 of them, if anybody knows the story, I think I'm right, about 200 of them turned around and came back to Charlie's Place. And a gunfight ensued. Charlie was severely injured. I think he eventually recovered, but was never quite himself. It's amazing more people weren't killed. The only person who died was a Klansman who, upon removing his hood, because they're cowards, so they were hoods, cover the face, was a Conway city policeman. Now, this wasn't entirely a surprise to my dad. I mentioned to you about Mark Garner, who he brought to Myrtle Beach to run the Chamber of Commerce. And then Mark and his old college roommate Horace Carter got into the newspaper business. Horace Carter eventually won a Pulitzer Prize for his coverage of Klan infiltration of law enforcement agencies in Columbus County, North Carolina, and Horry County, South Carolina. And he and Mayor Garner were best friends. So when my dad took office, he knew there was KKK infiltration of the Myrtle Beach police force. I don't know the names, and I wouldn't. Anyway, the point is, he cleaned it up. He brought in a gentleman named Chief Carlisle Newton to be police chief, and that was his number one job, to get rid of the Klan. It appears, based on what happened at Charlie's Place in July of 1950, he succeeded, and no one on the Myrtle Beach police force was involved in the situation. It appears that way. I can't say for sure, but it appears that was the case. In any case, however, both the Horry County Sheriff's Department, the Columbus County Sheriff's Department, and the Conway Police Department did have involvement there. So to the extent that Myrtle Beach did not have that, the credit goes to Chief Newton and my dad, and also Mr. Carter and Mr. Garner for making my dad fully aware of the situation. Anyway, it was awfully good. It was in the New York Times, front page of the New York Times. It was a terrible, terrible thing. This bothered my dad his whole life. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, my dad was born in 1899 into a very different world. There weren't any African-American people in Madison County, North Carolina, okay? I'm not going to try to paint my dad as progressive on race by today's standards, maybe not even the standards of 1950. I don't know. I don't know just what to say. But he was also a very, very fair-minded person. And I know as late as the 1960s, New Way Laundry was the largest single employer of African Americans in Horry County. In any case, it bothered him his whole life, what happened. And I don't know if he found out that maybe there was some information he didn't see that he could have acted on to prevent it. I don't know. I don't know exactly where it came from, but he never got over it, is my point. He absolutely never got over it. And I've got the full statement from what he said about it. It was published again in the New York Times. I've thought about reading it, but I've kept you here long enough. I'm not going to get into all the details, but there are some things he said that are cringeworthy. No question. I mean, they are. He referred to, he meant it as a compliment. He was using the terms that were used in 1950. He said, I think we have the finest colored population of any city in America, things like that. He got into that there were rumors, which were true, that the reason it happened was because there were black people and white people socializing together at Charlie's place. And he added some things about my feelings on that are not important. The important part is that it's legal. It was legal in South Carolina for it to happen, and I'll enforce the law and I'll protect my citizens. So anyway, that was certainly not. That was one of the darker days in my father's two terms as mayor. And if you want to go read the whole statement, it's in the archives they have here up in the reference section. You can read what he read. I would ask you to judge him however you wish to judge him. I mean, it just was what it was. But I think it is clear, that the folks who lived, the voters and the citizens of that part of town, and back then, white folks and black folks didn't live in the same part of town. You know that. They didn't matter just as much to them as did the white folks. I think that part at least is clear. So anyway, I wanted to talk about Charlie's Place, as unpleasant as it is to talk about, and my dad's very, very public role in that. And I can tell you too, he really meant it when he said, and he talked about this in his statement, the reason we had the police, they were giving them an escort. They were there to protect the two sides from each other. And once they left the city of Myrtle Beach, we thought it was over. In any case, that's kind of the story there. So I'm going to go back to some other events, and we'll lead up into what happened with the Air Force Base. I really need to get moving, don't I? I'm so sorry.
No, but it's great.
I told you this is really running. I'll try to wrap it up real quick, okay? So thank you very much. I had no idea. You're very patient.
You can beat Wayne's record.
Yeah, well, if I do, I do.
You're fine.
So he was reelected in 1951, and again, 58% of the vote. And going through just through the newspaper clippings on his work on the base, on November 12th of 1951, there's a conference with Air Force engineers for the reopening of the base. The newspaper says Air Force sets a target date of late 1953, early 1954 for the base to be reopened. According on 5/15/51, according to the Myrtle Beach newspaper, the House Armed Services Committee votes to send to the floor, again with Elemental Rivers' hands all over it, a request for $9 million to start rebuilding the Myrtle Beach base. In July of 1952, the full House and Senate vote to appropriate the $9 million to reopen the base. And work begins, quote, that month. Air Force Base reactivation work will start this week, meaning the construction. The article goes on to say that the first contracts awarded by November 1952, and all contracts should be awarded by April 1st, 1953, to start basically building the base. Notice April 1st, 1953. What's another word for April 1st, guys? April Fool's Day. That's important. Okay. So in January 1953, December 1952, contracts awarded for building a new base were approved by the Department of Defense. And according to the Myrtle Beach newspaper, the headline, Air Force Base construction to start next month. In January 1953, my dad announced the South Carolina Highway Department has agreed to move roads at their expense for the building of the base. Then, are you guys familiar with what Friday the 13th means? Okay. Friday, February 13th, headline in the Myrtle Beach News, Mayor spikes rumors concerning Air Force Base. February 27th, 23, headline, work halted on base. General Eisenhower had been elected president. He basically started over. The previous work had been done under the Truman administration. Excuse me, he halted all construction on base construction anywhere. It wasn't more than 35% done. It all stopped. The freeze, there are quotes from articles from my dad saying, don't worry, we're still going to get it. This is temporary. On August 1st of 1953, freeze was lifted on the base construction. I'm going to go ahead and, excuse me, 53, yeah, 53. In any case, we're going to jump into some other things and we'll come back to the base real quickly. My dad announced he wasn't running for re-election in August of that year. The convention center is the last thing we're going to wrap up with. Another one of the great white whales of his life. In 1953, he appointed a committee to build a municipal auditorium and convention hall here in Myrtle Beach. There had been a racetrack up south of where Myrtle Square Mall is now on the corner of 21st Avenue and Kings Highway. They picked that site to build it. There are articles where he talked about he met with, James Bryan, the head of Myrtle Beach Farms, who promised him 30 acres of land there to build it. In any case, for whatever reason, after he left office, it just kind of stumbled and stopped. He decided not to run. One of the reasons he did was he was about to do something that was going to be very, very controversial. There were a number of intrusions, alleys down here on Ocean Front that had been built on by private property owners over the years. He fought a long court battle to get permission to clear them out. And he was getting ready to send the city's bulldozers in to clear them out. And a couple of weeks after he announced he wasn't going to run for a third term is when he sent him in and did that. For you locals, you remember all the controversy over the years about the alleyways, 60-foot lots. That was kind of, anyway, he took care of it with city bulldozers and a court order. So moving forward real quickly on how it all played out with the base. He left office on January 5th, 1954. In February of 1954, Congressman Rivers came to Myrtle Beach with the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Dewey Short, to announce that Myrtle Beach the plan was back on for the Myrtle Beach Air Force Base. The first Air Force Base personnel were assigned to Myrtle Beach from Shaw in June of 1954, and the base was fully activated in 1956. They spent over $35 million in 1956 money. So it finally happened a little bit after he left, but it did happen. And again, it's all because of Felix Davis, that little boy up in the mountains. Really going to wrap it up here. My dad opened a business called Seacoast Finance Company with Jimmy Porter in 1952. He was involved in defining the Coastal Federal Savings and Loan with his old buddies Buster Bryan, Joe Ivy, and John McLeod. In 1954, after Hugo, he was appointed chairman of the Small Business Disaster Loan Committee. He dispersed SBA loans to folks and was chair of the building committee for the Elks Club. When People's National Bank expanded from Conway to Myrtle Beach in the late 50s, the Spivey's knew my dad from the Dunes Club. They invited him to join their board of directors. He was there. We got some pictures as we keep going with a real fast one. So there we go. This is King's Dairy. We'll come back to that. Thank you.
Go the other direction, Mark.
Pardon me?
No. Yeah. You passed it already. The board of directors.
I'm sorry.
There.
Yeah, this is Coastal Federal. And then we scroll down, we'll see a picture of the First People's Federal Building. Thanks for your hard work, Mark. And Jen, thanks for directing us. That's Coastal Federal.
Oh, maybe it is further down.
This is my dad with People's Federal. Eventually became CNS Bank. It's now part of Bank of America. I want to mention real quick, my dad, what he would do, he never invested anything in the stock market, although he owned a lot of stock for a lot of local businesses because of, growing, being a young man during the Depression. He bought a lot of local lots and everything. Anyway, a number of motels that he ended up building into large concrete and steel ones, the Breakwater Inn, the Tropical Court, and the Oceanfront Motel. He ran those businesses successful for many years. I want to mention Margaret Loftus and Sam Davis, who worked with him there and the success there. And then he wasn't getting any younger, so he got back with the city on the idea of getting that municipal auditorium convention center thing going again. There's a long interview with him in 1965 where he talked about Myrtle Beach Farms, basically said, we don't know anything about this agreement you had with us. So they worked out a deal to build the convention center where it stands now. Governor McNair got involved and got city money, and they got some federal money, but they were short the money to buy the land. Myrtle Beach Farms wouldn't donate it. So my dad wrote a check. This is him giving the check to Mayor Garner for $40,000 to buy the land where the convention center sits, and also some of the schools, Doug Shaw and Pepper Gettings. For that, it was kind of his last little public act. If we stroll through, we see a year later in '66, I believe we'll see the groundbreaking. Mayor Garner, Colonel Cameron preceded Mayor Garner, who was big on it too, Governor McNair, and my dad. And then finally, we have the ribbon cutting. I think it's one more slide down in 1967. And at that point, he pretty much retired from public life and passed away January 6, 1973. If you go out to the air base, the people out there are great. Buddy Stars has done a magnificent job out there. There's no slight to my dad. Just no one remembers what I just told you. And I'm so glad I was able to find it documented in the newspaper records. Maybe we can work together to get something out there to mention him, and maybe Congressman Rivers, and maybe even Felix Davis. In any case, mentions that there are of him in Myrtle Beach. This is his cemetery marker out of Ocean Woods. And a couple of other things. I'm not sure they're up or down marked. This is Ramsey Drive. He bought King's Dairy, where Ramsey Acres is now, in the early 50s. Eventually sold it. And we've got a little ad in here for Ramsey Acres. There's a marker. It was not originally at the convention center. It was expanded in 1994. Mayor Grissom had it installed. This is up at the installation. This is Jack Martin, my dad's brother-in-law from his first marriage. It was a huge part of his life and needs to be mentioned. This is Mary Colleen's older sister, Stephanie. This is my sister, Nina, who I touched on briefly. She, like the other siblings, are no longer with us. This is my mother, the biggest impact on his life. This is me, and this is Mary and Stephanie's mother, Pam, who's deceased. There's that. There's one more thing. You can keep going down, Mark. There's a marker in front of the convention center, the Special Events Plaza, that my mom paid for in 1976. And there's the cemetery marker and the sign, and there's that beautiful portrait at City Hall. But that's all there is. Again, which was found by my dad. He always said fools' names and faces often seen in public places. When he donated the money to buy the land, they wanted to name the whole chamber, the whole building after it. When he declined and said no, just put Myrtle Beach's name on it. So anyway, had a little bit more of a closing, but we've taken over way too long. So anyone who needs to leave, get out of here. And if there's time, I certainly have all the time needed to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Yes, we certainly want to take questions. You know, I think it's almost impossible when we ask these wonderful speakers to come and talk about incredible people like Mayor Ramsey and do it in 45 minutes. It's a ridiculous thing. So do not blink an eye. You were incredible. Your research, Jasper, and I mean, with everything your father did, we probably should have given you at least 2 days to do this presentation. He really was an incredible part of Myrtle Beach, and I hope before we take questions, that those of us who are involved with history and things that are going on in the community, Mark, we certainly should make sure that some markers are, established for Mayor Ramsey. Wouldn't you all agree?
It's not Mark's fault.
Oh, it's not Mark's fault, but Mark is involved in the city, and they have been so responsible in doing such a great job in documenting the things that have happened and putting up markers. Any questions? Let's see. Anybody have any questions for us? Yes, first one up.
All right, so your mom's first name is?
Athalia Ramsey.
All right, now, Barbara Stokes in her book quoted your mom about
Yes.
during the war that the Doolittle Raiders' uniforms were cleaned at New Way Cleaners.
That's
Did you
true.
ever talk about that?
A little bit, yes. My dad owned New Way Laundry and the Cleaners right down here where the Olympic Flame is now. Doolittle's Raiders, Jen knows the official history of this better, me jump in if I'm wrong. They were based out of Columbia Air Force Base.
Yep.
But they did training missions here in Myrtle Beach, and they apparently also brought their families down for like long weekends and that type of thing. So my mother and my dad and all of the folks who worked there knew Jimmy Doolittle and all the Raiders. That is true. But again, now, they were not based at Myrtle Beach Army Air Corps Base. They were based at the Columbia Army Air Corps Base. But that is true, yes. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
How much time did you spend at Myrtle Beach, or did you ever live at Myrtle Beach?
Yeah, I was born in Conway Hospital in 1959. When I was 3 days old, I came home.
So I suppose you visited the pavilion.
Oh, I grew up at the pavilion, as we all did. Yes, yes, we did. Thank you.
That's great, because I understand where we talk about Myrtle Beach and the beach music.
Yes,
I see how it was established and originated.
it was Charlie's place. At Charlie's place, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Excellent job.
Thank you. And by the way, thank you so much again. What an excellent job the city has done of rebuilding the site of Charlie's place and the markers and the recognition it originally deserves. The impact it had on all of us. The impact was not at all limited to members of our African American community, I assure you. So.
Another question. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I've always been curious about the German prisoners of war in Myrtle Beach and their development of the Market Common area that is now the Market Common.
Right.
Could you comment on that?
I know a little bit, mostly stories just from my mom, and then coming to some of the meetings here, some other folks who were around back then, including Ruth Gore, I think, have talked about that. But yeah, there were, during World War II, there were German POWs housed here. I was always astounded as a kid. My mom hearing the stories. I'm sorry, I messed up the video there. I was always astounded to learn the freedom there. They would bring laundry to the laundry and drop it off. So they had a great deal of freedom. But yeah, there were prisoners of war stationed here during World War II. And I've learned from coming to meetings here with Mark and Gianna and Martina. Some of them. Later on, I guess they were just like enlisted men. They were freed, came back to Myrtle Beach to visit too. But yeah, that's a true story. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
Your mom's passed?
My mom passed in 2014 at the age of 94. Yes. Yes, thank you.
But she continued to be real involved in the Hospitality Association.
Oh, yeah. Very, very, very much. Thank you. Yeah, had I not babbled on for so long, it would have been more about her, but in the list of people that my dad would want to talk about, and she was certainly number one. Yes.
The woman behind the man.
You better believe it. But again, literally, if you saw that one picture that I showed you at the Christmas party where she was right behind him. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes,
Yes,
dear.
ma'am.
I'm sorry, did shag originate at Myrtle Beach? The dance shagging?
Not my area of expertise, but I'm told that it did. Yes.
Well, there was a lot of that going on at the beach. That's considered part of the beach, shagging at the beach.
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Ocean Drive or something.
Myrtle Beach does take credit, even though North Myrtle Beach also takes credit. So we would just say the Grand Strand. But yes, shagging originated here, and shagging still goes on big time. And as most of you know, the National Shag Dance Championships is a biggie every year in North Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, they've been a little better job of keeping that alive than we have here in Myrtle Beach itself.
Mm-hmm.
The key thing is it's still alive.
Right, and of course, when the Magic Attic and the Pavilion were here, there was lots of shagging going on, and that's been documented in a lot of the documentaries, for sure. Any other questions? Well, we can certainly say, Jasper, you didn't have a life for the past couple of months. All you've done is research. And Mary Colleen, we thank you too for coming in from Charlotte to be with us and be part of this presentation. You certainly have great lineage and great roots, and we thank you and your dad and the whole family for the time and money that he certainly put into making Myrtle Beach a better place.
Thank you, Diane, and thanks to you and Jen.
No, we love doing this.
And Mark and all the folks who are working to Myrtle Beach, but also to preserve its history. And thank you folks for sitting here. Again, you could have got up and gone to the restroom. I didn't realize it was so long.
No, but we do want you to know Catherine Hedgepath, who asked the question earlier. Catherine, stand up and smile. She is our next speaker on December 6th, and you don't want to miss Catherine. She does historical tours. That's not hysterical, it's historical. But sometimes they're hysterical. And she's going to tell stories about history that she's done research on. And she's also going to tell us some things about, when she's taking the little trolley train throughout Market Common, some of the things that people ask her. I think it'll be fascinating to hear some of the questions that people ask her. She's laughing now because
Well, don't forget about Daddy, your dear friend, the first veterinarian in Myrtle Beach. be a lot of stories about Daddy.
Yes, yes. Her dad was an incredible veterinarian, and I interviewed him many years ago. You know, when they're talking about all these people, and I think, oh, well, I interviewed him, and I realize how old I am. I just, you mentioned several people, and I was like, well, I interviewed Mark Gardner, and, and Lambeau Schwartz, and I'm thinking, what is this all about? But anyway, this series has been incredible. I love being a part of it. Jen, thank you for doing it. Do you have any final messages?
We're coming into the holidays, so some of our programming is a little bit lighter, but as always, please take a look at the newsletter to see what's coming up. I just want to say a special thank you to Jasper, because we worked together on this for the last couple, it's been a couple months, really.
It's been an amazing experience, it really is.
It has been, and I've learned so many wonderful things about your dad and enjoyed so much of the time going through the microfilm and the old photos, so I feel like a part of the family.
You are a part of the family, Jim, no question. And you're part of the City of Myrtle Beach family from my dad's point of view. And again, I know all of you city employees, when you get that Christmas bonus, remember that was started by my dad for city employees. He would just say thank you for your hard work. I've got a mic and they can't stop me, so Jack Thompson is here. Jack Thompson is the preeminent historian and chronicler of Myrtle Beach. Jack Thompson, I'm talking over the applause because y'all got to get going. Jack Thompson was also a dear friend of both my mom and my dad. We are spending a lot of money to fix up downtown Myrtle Beach. It is long overdue, and I am terribly excited about it. I hope y'all are too. My mom and dad would be. Jack needs a place to have a studio and also a museum downtown. I don't know why in the world they can't get it done. You've heard from the stories I've told you about how long it took my dad to get some things done. I strongly encourage you, if you live in the city of Myrtle Beach, to reach out to every elected official you know and tell them that Jasper Ramsey sent you, to tell them to find a place to enhance downtown and for Jack to be able to share his amazing work over the years and be a more vibrant part of the community. Having a revitalized downtown Myrtle Beach without Jack Thompson would be similar to having Disney World but not having Mickey anywhere, although Jack is by no means Mickey Mouse. Wow. So I ask you, please, not for me, not even for Jack, but for my dad, for Jasper Ramsey, call anyone you know who controls any purse strings anywhere or has a vote for the sake of downtown as much as for Jack. We need him there. It's a great thing for the city. That's a request from Jasper Ramsey to do that. Please, on his part, do it. And by the way, even though he's long ago, he's a powerful guy. You don't want to mess with him. Thank you very, very much for your patience.
Thank you, Jasper. Thank you, everyone. And have a wonderful, blessed Thanksgiving, Just remember, when we've got our health and the love of our family and friends, we got everything. See you all soon, December 6th.
I will tell you one tidbit on
Fine, thank you, back.
just between me and you.
Well, I was going to
And he's not. You have to keep digging your way out. But he does have some thank you right here. This has been great. You take care, my dear.
Happy Thanksgiving.
You good?